Welcome everyone to another recording of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. We are back for more news, tech content, and wisdom for the world of marketing. Joining me, my co-host, a marketing speaker and consultant who spent his whole career helping his customers keep their marketing simple but effective. Is the author of 𝗧𝗵𝗲 Marketing Plans and the creator of the Roger video series. I give you Mr. Roger Edwards.
Well, thank you so much. And of course, my co-host is a digital marketing veteran. He's a speaker, trainer, and advisor with nearly 3 decades of experience who enjoys revealing visual storytelling techniques to help you build better online campaigns faster. I give you Monsieur Pascal Fintoni.
Well, listen, everyone, viewers and listeners, and Roger, this is episode 120.
120. Absolutely amazing. It's been almost 4 years since we started the podcast during the intensity of the COVID pandemic.
Indeed, and I like to tell the story over and over again because there's a lesson in that for everyone. But, we kept in touch almost daily, calling each other to see how we were doing and almost putting the world of marketing to right. And I think, I can't recall, maybe it was you, it was me, maybe it was a mutual kind of meeting of minds when we said, we should record this because that might cheer a few people up being stuck at home as we were. And from that point on, Two Geeks and Marketing Podcast was born. We recorded a handful of podcasts. They were launched in July and August of 2020. And well, viewers and listeners, it's your fault. We've been carrying on since then because of the lovely feedback, the comments from our close friends, but also new friends we made along the way. And as we discussed in the green room, because of the subject matter of marketing and selling, customer service and strategies, but also because of the segments we've kind of invented to make the show as interesting, but also as diverse as possible, we just keep going.
Yeah. I mean, we are blessed that the marketing industry is in total and utter flux. New technology is being invented day in, day out. The constant clash between new technologies and the fact that the basics, the strategies, don't actually change as the technology changes. And of course, a wealth of films and TV series to talk about as well.
So the whole point for viewers and listeners, who may be your full-time marketers, maybe marketing is a kind of an addition to a very, very busy agenda. It's a source of inspiration. It's to make sure that you don't feel too lonely in your pursuit of marketing your employees or even your own products and services. So we have the In the News, and we usually look at 8 news items that's made the headlines. And on this episode, Roger, we're going to be looking at whether the world has gone AI mad, as you'll see in a moment. But I love our content spotlights where we choose one piece of content each and we just kind of deep dive and reflect whether or not there could be some inspiration for our next marketing campaign. But we also look back in time, this week in history, and we look at 4 historical items. We're looking at something that happened nearly 100 years ago around transport, around TV and movie productions. Can be fascinating. Then we go back into the present with the marketing tech and apps. So typically, we select 2 apps. We're going to a bit of a journey of discovery and things that can make life easier as content creators. And we always end, and we've done so since episode 1, with film marketing. And it was your turn to choose the film for episode 120.
Yeah, we are going to be talking today about the film Presumed Innocent, which was released in 1990. Now, that is quite a long time ago, Pascal, and it is an absolutely brilliant film. And I rewatched it just this week. And the reason we're going to be talking about it is that there's now been a new TV series version of Presumed Innocent released just in the last few weeks. And it's my opinion on the difference between the TV series and the film that effectively inspired me to include it in this week's film marketing section.
Thank you. Another fine selection. Can't wait to get to that point. But before we do so, let's start with our very first segment, In the News.
Wall's Ice Cream has introduced Wally, our ice cream freezer who comes to life to showcase popular products such as Cornetto Classico, Twister Mini and Solero Exotic.
Well, according to Brandwatch Consumer Research, conversations about AI in marketing, SEO, and content creation have increased by over 90% on Reddit amongst marketers.
Google Podcasts, which closed in April across the US, has finally closed globally too. This was the third attempt at a podcast player from Google. It was almost 6 years old.
Well, Toys R Us has created the first brand film using only AI called The Origin of Toys R Us. The 60-second video tells the story of how founder Charles Lazarus created the brand and its Jeffrey the Giraffe mascot.
TikTok has launched its AI Symphony Toolkit, which includes digital avatars, translation tools, and a chatbot to help with brainstorming, writing scripts, and optimizing content for the platform.
Forbes is threatening legal action against Perplexity, an AI search engine startup. The accusation? Well, stealing and republishing Forbes' original content without proper attribution.
In a first-of-its-kind event, the World AI Creator Awards partnered with FanView, a platform for AI creators, to launch the Miss AI pageant, with over 1,500 AI-generated models entering the competition.
And finally, forget about self-driving cars, everyone. Researchers from the University of Tokyo are exploring the use of humanoid robots that would mimic human drivers using a mechanical human-like driver alongside with sensors and software to control your car. So it feels as though, you and I are just picking up those headlines and we report them back into this segment in the news. But right now, the world has gone AI mad. I mean, who on earth would spend their time to go through 1,500 AI-generated models for a competition called Miss AI Pageant? What's going on?
I mean, obviously AI is the big thing amongst marketers, but it's a big thing amongst any industry. I do wonder whether there are a lot of great big bandwagons being hopped on here, though, Pascal, because it's almost like the latest thing, isn't it? In brackets, powered by AI, or this app is AI powered. This event comes to you powered by AI. Now, again, we've had this conversation. A lot of times we're just talking about computer programs here. We're not really talking about artificial intelligence, robots and things like that. So I think there's a lot of bandwagons being jumped upon here, and people are now rebranding things as AI when effectively they've been around for a long time. The trick is to try and sift out the true AI stuff from the stuff that already existed, which people are now calling AI. I've no idea whether I explained that right, but that's how I feel.
Yeah, it's kind of almost AI washing. So we went from greenwashing to AI
Yes.
washing. But for me, so I understand that there are some brands looking right now at creating a number of avatars that would become almost representative of the organization. So there's a near future, which is literally I'm talking about weeks, not even months and years, where you have a high street brand where you go on the website, you go on social media, and you will be addressed by an avatar, not by a member of the team, as in as a real human being. And what is kind of interesting is this idea of the Miss AI page was essentially about the likeness to human beings. That's where they were being awarded. But within that, you've got all manner of bias and things like this, because there was also an attempt done in the UK about, can AI essentially create an avatar of your typical, and it seems to be always female, interestingly, English person compared to Irish, compared to Scottish, and so on. And you had essentially this strange kind of avatar that was not, very real to me, was just average in terms of the facial features and more. So then I want to kind of link that conversation to the use of mascots. So you have Wally, which I think is a kind of awkward term, because there is a very famous character released by Pixar, many years ago, which I actually use in my AI workshop. So already there's a naming is tricky, but we have Wally from Walls. We have obviously Jeffrey the Giraffe. I'm sure the marketing team thought long and hard a name there. So the use of mascots, which was something that was very popular and common in the 80s and 90s, seems to have come back. But it feels like it should be a word of caution, because it doesn't always work. And I will tell you that I am left perplexed, and I'm using the term on purpose because that links me to the next news item, but left perplexed with the LNER mascot. It just actually doesn't work for me. So yeah, it's a known marketing device to bring a mascot into the brand communication, but you've got to get it right.
Yeah, the LNER mascot's quite interesting because I actually used that recently as an example with a client as maybe how you wouldn't do something, because to me it doesn't actually create any empathy to me with a method of transport. It's quite clever. I think the mascot is called Eleanor, isn't it? Eleanor, LNER. I suppose it's quite clever in that respect. But apart from that, all it is to me it looks like a Muppet with red hair, which is the same color red as the LNER logo. And beyond that, it just has absolutely nothing to do with trains whatsoever, and nothing to do with transport. So if you are going to use a mascot, I think it's got to fit with your brand and actually add to the brand rather than just being there for no readily apparent reason.
Do you think brands really want to try and almost secure that pole position the way in which Compare the Meerkat did? So they're still looking for that meerkat moment, because more often than not, I think that the mascots they don't work, and they almost, for me, a source of being irritant as opposed to something that you look forward to seeing.
Yeah, I guess people try things out, but to me, a mascot is similar to a brand logo or to an advertising visual. It has to say something about your brand. It has to say something about your proposition. It has to say something about your product, rather than just being there. And with the LNER thing is, I see it's a interesting sort of Muppet type thing, but I just don't see how it fits with the actual raison d'etre of LNER, which is to transport people up and down the east coast of the UK in relative comfort.
Yeah, so everyone, you will be approached by well-intentioned agencies and more about having AI avatars joining the team, so to speak, and becoming almost individuals on social media to share your messages. You'll be approached by both saying you need a mascot, and I would say, follow the advice from Roger about, reflect on your strategy, reflect on your audience, and if you're going to go ahead, you've got to get it right. And I think it's almost the way you introduce it as well is going to be very, very important. Let me then turn to Toys R Us then. This idea of, is it a PR stunt claiming here we are, we've created a 60-second movie of sort, which is about our beginnings, how was, Toys R Us founded and the creation of Jeffrey the giraffe. And this idea of it was only AI. This essentially, there was a script and the script was transformed into a video footage using OpenAI Sora. Is this something that is going to keep going as a practice, or just a PR stunt coming to you?
Well, again, it keeps coming back to this fact that we're all going AI mad at the moment, and one of the things I'm going to talk about when we get to content spotlights is what's going on in the music industry, and to a certain extent, we've got the same thing going on here. Is somebody has given this AI production platform a fairly, I would hope, a fairly detailed prompt, and it's come out with this film. But what we should never forget is that the moment everything that AI does is effectively replicating something that exists already. Whether it's a piece of music, whether it's a piece of blog article, whether it's a piece of podcast, it will have learned that from something that already exists. So the problem I have is, yeah, let's be creative, but unless we start putting new stuff, completely new stuff, into that external environment, then all we're going to get back is a slightly inferior copy of something that already exists. And if we then rely upon the AI to keep doing that, then the only way is a descent into mediocrity. So, yes, it might be a publicity stunt, but let's not rely upon it totally going forward. We still have to find a way of coming out with totally new stuff. And totally new stuff, to me, still relies upon a human being to intervene and create something completely new and stand out.
For me, I have some sympathy with the something would be more disposable. So let's say a social media post that would be essentially forgotten about within 24 hours. I have some sympathy with the temptation to use AI to create something that would be seen and forgotten about. But when it comes to something such as, evergreen content, this is what this is about, then I'm struggling. Have you come across also the kind of semi-PR disaster with this movie called The Last Screenwriter?
No, I've not heard of that.
So this may be actually a next content spotlight, but very quickly for everyone, The Last Screenwriter is an experiment by film producers where they got ChatGPT to write a script about a screenwriter losing his essentially livelihood because he's being replaced by AI, everything that comes with it. And it's been absolutely fascinating, the experiment, because they went through the whole process of prompting and creating a script and back and forth. Then using the ChatGPT script, they went ahead and produced it, did the casting and so on. They even got ChatGPT to reply to interviews and so on. So they're really pushing the experiment to its limit. But they had a premiere in London that got boycotted by filmmakers, and they couldn't go ahead with it. So just an interesting, what is happening at this moment in time. We are at the beginning. We're having this ongoing conversation. Listen, I'd love to ask you a bit more question about the news items, but time is against us. So I'm going to close on the self-driving cars and this experiment from the University of Tokyo, where they essentially saying they won't be driverless. They will essentially be a robot. And that almost takes me to the Total Recall movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, if you recall it, and I'm wondering whether actually this is very clever maneuvering from them in terms of they've heard and observed the resistance from most people about having a driverless car. So what they said is, well, we're going to have the same technology, but we're essentially going to position it as a human-like driver so that you can be reassured and be a passenger in that car. I think it's just a clever move, actually.
Yeah, I suppose it's giving people that little bit of comfort. I mean, we do have driverless things, don't we? Like the Docklands Light Railway in London is driverless, but there is always a person sat there where the driver would have sat had there been a driver to make sure that nothing goes wrong. So isn't that really a driver? I don't know. It's quite interesting, isn't it? But I think some people are still quite nervous giving over complete control. And let's face it, there are a lot of nutters out there driving cars at the best of times. And whether you're a good driver or not, people like to feel that they have control over their environment. And if you give that control over to somebody else, then nervousness sets in. I mean, one of the reasons why a lot of people are nervous of flying is because they're just sat in a seat and somebody else is doing all the work and doing all the decision making. And because you've got no control over what's happening, even though you would have absolutely no idea how to fly a plane, you still feel nervous because you don't have any control at all.
Absolutely. So listen, it feels as though for now the world has gone a little AI mad, but we, all of us, collectively need to be the voices of reason. We need to stick to strategy. We need to stick to audience knowledge and profiling to make a wise decision. And let's not have suddenly just AI avatars all over social media and some bizarre mascots all over YouTube. That would just be a very, very strange, step forward. Anyway, always a pleasure to hear your views, Roger. Viewers and listeners, if you've come across other marketing headlines and you think that Roger and I should react to, do share them. We would love to add that into this segment and give you a shout out. But for now, let's slow things down. Time for a deep dive into the content spotlights. Now, in this segment of the show, Roger and I select one article, a video, maybe even a podcast episode, and we discuss the content so that we can find ways to improve our next marketing efforts. So, Roger, what is your selection for episode 120?
Well, we are going to go to YouTube today, and we're going to look at a gentleman called Rick Beato, an American gentleman. He's a musician. Now, I've watched this guy for quite a number of years, and normally what he does is he does reviews of music, whether it's a song from the 1950s or a song from 2023. What he tends to do is analyze the song structure, the notes, the chords, the different layering of the different instruments on top of each other. And this guy is an absolute wizard musician. If you watch his videos, it looks like he can play just about everything. He can play lead guitar, he can play bass guitar, he can play the drums, he can play the keyboards, he can play the flute, he can do absolutely everything. But what was very interesting is his latest video, which he put out, which was just a little bit different. And the headline, I did wonder whether it was a bit clickbait. It says, "The real reason why music is getting worse." Now, I immediately thought, I bet he's going to be talking about AI here. But actually, given all that we've said already in today's episode, this isn't really about AI. Now, just to preface this, as you know, Pascal, I teach a couple of fitness classes from a New Zealand company called 𝗪𝗲𝗲𝗸, and I've been doing this for coming on to 20 years now. And every 3 months, I get a new selection of music and a new selection of routines to teach these classes too. And over the last few years, I've been getting increasingly frustrated that the music that comes with these releases, to me, just keeps sounding absolutely identical. And it's driving me insane. And when I started doing the 𝗪𝗲𝗲𝗸 programs 20 years ago, they were using chart hits that you would recognize. Now I don't recognize any of the music other than the fact that it sounds exactly the same. And I was listening to the latest release, which only came through my email a few days ago, and I had a really good close listen to one of the tracks and then compared it to the equivalent track in the previous release and then the previous release. And not only does it sound the same, Pascal, I think it is the same. It sounds like exactly the same drum beat. I mean, absolutely exactly the same drum beat. The same sort of keyboard style. The only thing that's different is the singer, and the melody is slightly different. And that's when I saw this headline from Rick Beato, and that's when I went in and watched this. And I think he has the explanation here. And believe it or not, it's nothing to do with AI, but AI might actually make it even worse than he's actually saying in his video. So basically, he starts off talking about how they used to record records when Frank Sinatra started out. And when Frank Sinatra started out, they would put him in a room with an orchestra. They'd mic him up with one microphone, maybe two microphones, and the orchestra would have microphones pointing at them. And he would go in, the orchestra would start playing, and he would sing, and they would make a take. And if he made a mistake, they'd have to redo the whole thing. Now, of course, over the years, technology has developed. So we were able to record things, and then you can chop things out and you can do a loop of a tape. Then we had the invention of something called auto-tune. And I think Cher's song "Believe" was one of the first songs to use auto-tune. And auto-tune can, as you would suspect, it can take somebody's voice who's out of tune and put it into tune. And that's become more and more and more sophisticated over the years, to the extent that now singers can go on stage at a live concert and be auto-tuned as they sing, so that they don't sound out of tune, even if they are. And he then starts talking about how, in the past, you might have had a rock drummer like Phil Collins or Ringo Starr, and they've got this great way of shuffling it. But because of the nature of how you play the drums, no two takes would ever be the same. There would always be a subtle little difference. But as time goes by, they would record that drum sound and they would sample it. And then in the next record, they would just reuse the sample. So the sample then stays the same. And if you trace that back from there to where I started with my 𝗪𝗲𝗲𝗸's music, what they are doing is they're using the same drum sample in every single musical track now. And that's why, to me, it sounds absolutely identical. And what Rick's saying is now that we've got to the stage where everything is becoming so reusable that the creativity is going. And to a certain extent, even the record companies are guilty of not encouraging people to be creative. You say, oh, just go away, use this drum track, go away, use this keyboard track, go away, use this click, whatever it is. And they just create something that's completely bland and doesn't have a life of its own and sounds exactly the same as everything else. And then he sort of flips it over onto its head and says, to a certain extent, we as consumers are also fueling this problem because, and then he uses the example, had he wanted to go out and buy an album by Frank Sinatra in the past, he would have had to have saved up some money to buy that album. Whereas now, for the cost of one album a month, 10.99 or whatever it is, you can have access via Spotify, via Apple Music, whatever it is. You can have access to pretty much every single piece of pop music, rock music that's ever been produced. So we as consumers have almost devalued the value of music by subscribing to these services. I actually did recently buy a CD of a band that I have a lot of respect for, but before that, I probably haven't bought a CD or an album for a decade. So I fueled this problem. And what Rick's saying is that we've got to the stage now where we can create music that's the same as everything that's come before it. And to feed this ravenous machine that is Spotify and Apple Music and everything, you almost have to do that to keep up with the demand. And the only way forward is even more mediocrity. And I said at the beginning, this wasn't about AI, but he does finish the video off by saying, and then think about what happens when we start to layer AI on top of that. And our prompt is, take the last 10 years of Les Mills music and create something that sounds absolutely identical. And guess what? That's what you'll get. Something that's completely identical, lacks any creativity, and is just exactly the same. And eventually people will start to notice this. But will we as consumers be prepared to pay to get ourselves out of this creative rut? That did turn out to be a bit of a rant, didn't it?
That's quite all right. And it's always a pleasure for you to bring your passion for music to the show because it is a different perspective, and all marketers need to be looking at what else is happening in other sectors, in other kind of spheres of activities. And as I was listening to you and I was reading the title on the show notes, the real reason why music is getting worse, it's very tempting to change the term music to content or to film or to
Yeah.
literature and so on. So it feels as though, it's also the timings are on warning that I have a slide in my kind of AI workshop, which is more is not better, better is better. And what I mean by that is this temptation for the efficiency and the efficacy of technology and AI. It's like, wow, look what I can do so much quicker is not necessarily the best course of action. And I know that when you're a skilled operator with regard to software and AI solution, it's very tempting to get things out in the public domain, as quickly as possible to move on to the next thing. But your point about the whole reflection and gestation period of a music track or a book or an article or a video for YouTube, I think people are cheating themselves of that phase, that pre-production phase, and then the production is very swift. Therefore, you cheat yourself from the moment where you can actually have a moment of genius where you improve upon the work, because after that, post-production is only the result of the quality reflection and the quality recording or writing at the time. This is a great addition to Content Spotlight because that's what this deep dives are all about, the reflection, so that we don't miss out on what it means to be a marketer in today's economy. And for me, and that's something that you have mentioned time and time again on the show, we've got to be very careful. It's taken forever for marketers to have a seat at the boardroom table. And little by little, with things like this, where you can hack your way through a marketing campaign or production of any content, we're going to lose it and just be operators of systems to get things out.
Absolutely. So, Pascal, what is your content spotlight this week?
So this is actually an article that was shared via the Shopify newsletters. Shopify perhaps will need a little introduction, the kind of e-commerce solution for most organizations out there. And what was interesting, so I am on the mailing list only because I want to know what is changing technically and what are the new features of a typical Shopify e-commerce solution. But they do some kind of more business-like articles. And this one is called Closing a Sale, Best Practices for Finalizing Deals. and that's by the Shopify team. So, by the way, to all brands out there, we'd love to know who the real people are, behind those articles. But I'm happy to thank the Shopify team on this occasion. And the timing was interesting because through my work, whether it's coaching or delivering workshops or speaking at event, I'm having more and more conversation about the selling element of a customer journey. You and I do a lot of advice around the top of funnel type things, if you don't mind the expression. But this idea of now that I've got the interested parties, now that a customer has put their hand up, what do I do next? And what I think this article is trying to suggest very implicitly is that there seems to be a bit of a de-skilling phase where people are forgetting how to close a deal. They're forgetting how to interact with customers face to face because of this over reliance on online. Now, listen, you mentioned, the introduction, I am a digital marketing guy through and through, but I honed my skills before the internet. And I think that what we need to be very careful is, back to your warning about, things that are becoming more mediocre in nature, is that we don't just oversimplify the bit where we're going to get someone to say yes, and we have to go back to our talent as communicators. But the article is actually well structured. So it begins by giving you a list of 10 sales closing techniques. Now, you don't have to use all 10, far from it, but I thought it was a very good reminder. And I would urge people to almost use that in the next sales and marketing meeting to say, do we actually know those 10? Are we forgotten some of those? Or are we simply using one or two because they're the one that somehow we believe that should be used? But also, very importantly, Roger, bear in mind that Shopify are an e-commerce website. Is it that because we've been putting so much energy into online kind of experiences, and there's only a handful of closing techniques really that a website can manifest, how we essentially by accident be de-skilling ourselves and our workforce? Just a question that I want to kind of raise there. And then there's some advice about, once you've done that, how can you close the sales? So very, very quickly, I'm going to go through all 10 techniques, and then you can all go into the articles. This is a bit of a teaser. I want to talk to you about their advice about how to close the sale. I want to talk about benefits and unique value proposition, because I think that's very, very important. So starting with the first one, which has a very intriguing name of sharp angle close. If you're intrigued, as I was, go and look at the article, the test drive close. Next, the scale close, the now or never close, the takeaway close, the summary close, the something for nothing close, the assumptive close, the soft close, and the alternative close. And these are labels that you can change internally. It's a good reminder about how communication skills can allow you to have more than one way to bring someone to believe in you and trust you and make that final decision. In terms of the journey, they recommend what you and I have been speaking about for a long time now. We say 4 years, but beyond that with our own careers. First, you must put effort, and a lot of effort, more than perhaps people are doing, to identify and qualify your leads. Very, very important. Then you have to put a lot of effort, more than people do, to communicate benefits more than just features. Then learn ways to ask for the sale, address the concerns, create a sense of urgency. I will come back to that if time allows. Use a combination of closing techniques, and then move the sale to the next step. So this is all kind of very structured and very nice and plausible. But then you have essentially the variable of the customers themselves and their own sets of beliefs, values, and so on. So one thing that people need to really go back to regularly is working on their benefit statements and the unique value proposition. And this exercise, Shopify can explain, is to allow you to have a clearer understanding about why people will choose you, and then manifest that through the communication. So they say there are 3 things that a typical customer will want to have clarity on: what your products and services provide, for sure, why they would need that particular product and service, but also why yours is different from that of the competition. So in short, what is it? Why this particular offer, and why us? You need to spend a lot of time and go back and revisit it on the kind of number of occasions. Kind of things that most customers will want to understand more than maybe the blunt statements that sometimes appear on website would be pricing. How did you derive that this is the right price for me. Any form of delivery or process, they want to understand that a lot more. Product features and benefits, any form of warranties, anything that will allow them to make a buying decision. But in closure, I think is very, very important. And that statement is actually at the very, very start of the article from Shopify. Closing a sale requires skill and finesse. And unless you nurture the skill and unless you understand what finesse is, which is essentially almost kind of beyond reasonable empathy with the customer, it just will not work. And it is unlikely that the automation that we see on website and the future kind of use of AI will have the required skills and finesse unless you intervene as a person. So again, kind of thread through, this episode 120 for you and I, which is we, people know a lot more than we sometimes give ourselves credit for, but let's be very careful. Sometimes the over-reliance on automation, digital solutions, and AI means that you can de-skill yourself and your workforce.
Yeah, and sometimes you've got to be careful when it comes to sales practices, haven't you? I always approach an article like this about sales techniques possibly with a little bit of suspicion, because there's often that undercurrent of there's some sort of black magic mind Jedi trick going on here, isn't it? Like, you will buy this product, this is the product that you need. And yes, there is always going to be charlatans out there who try to stack the deck in their favor. And let's face it, us marketers are just as guilty at using slogans and using ways to affect people's judgment. But ultimately, what it comes down to is the things that we always say on this program. The basics of marketing also apply to sales as well. Who's the customer? And you've got to understand and form a deep understanding, an obsessive understanding of that customer. What's their problem? What's their need? And how does your product or your service solve that problem better, preferably different to anybody else? And if you can answer those questions and create empathy with that particular customer, then ultimately you should be able to persuade them that your product or service will meet their need, will solve their problem, and they'll therefore buy it. It's possible that when you start layering on all of these black magic words, would you be open-minded to talk about this, or those sorts of words that we've read about in books, that's when people start to think, hold on a second, am I being played here? But if you just answer people's questions and be honest and empathize with them, then ultimately that's what selling is, isn't it?
Absolutely. And what I'm sensing from the marketplace is people have forgotten to even capture and record those moments where there's a exchange between you representing the organization and the potential customer, and having almost this kind of marketing and sales playbook where instead of using memory, which I think is tricky, you can go back and say, how do we explain and illustrate the benefits of using our services again? And how do we do that? And capturing those into playbook, handbooks, whatever you want to call them, I think is part of the message of this article. Because like I said, with rushing ahead along to try and come up with posts for Facebook and rushing ahead along to do the next bit of blog series because, you were told by some SEO expert you had to, the risk is that we're not nurturing the skill and the finesse that you need to essentially listen intently and understand how you might proceed, because you have a number of options about how to explain what you do, the benefit, but also why you have something a little different, which is part of the role of marketing. So now there was an interesting way in which Shopify, albeit being the ultimate e-commerce solution in some circles and markets, was actually looking at face-to-face interaction, which I thought was brilliant. Now, as we said before, many a time, none of this would be possible without the hard work and dedication of pioneers from the recent and distant past. I'm glad to say it's time to move on to our next segment, This Week in History.
In 1938, the Mallard was documented as the world's fastest steam locomotive, travelling at 126 miles per hour on the East Coast Main Line of the London and North East Railway, the aforementioned LNER that we were talking about.
Oh, wow. Well, in 1941, commercial television broadcasting begins in the US. After numerous tests dating back to 1937, the first telecast signal is sent to the top of the Empire State Building in New York and retransmitted to 5,000 Manhattan area viewers.
In 1969, the movie Once Upon a Time in the West, directed by Sergio Leone and starring Charles Bronson, Henry Fonda, and Claudia Cardinal, was released in the US.
The year was born in 1987. British millionaire Richard Branson and Per Lindstrand became the first to cross the Atlantic by a hot air balloon named Virgin Atlantic Flyer. They jumped into the sea as their craft went down off the Scottish coast.
We're going to have to talk about the mallard, I'm afraid, Pascal. Isn't it weird? Isn't it weird that you can jump on a train from Edinburgh down to London on the East Coast Main Line on an LNER, a Zuma train, which is built by Hitachi, based upon the Japanese bullet trains, and the top speed that train can get to is 125 miles per hour. Now, although the Mallard only beat that nearly 100 years ago by 1 mile per hour, isn't it interesting that we still don't have trains on the UK network that can go faster than 125 miles per hour? The Mallard is just absolute perfection in engineering. You can actually go and see it. It's at the Railway Museum in York.
Yeah.
And I think they do bring it out from time to time, and it does do the odd trip around, doesn't it? It's like the Flying Scotsman. It will make appearances, and it's just nostalgia. It's just nostalgia. I mean, the lines, it's very sleek. In fact, to a certain extent, the Mallard is a sort of sea blue, Caribbean sea blue color. And if you look at the Lumo trains that also run on the East Coast Main Line now, there's a similarity in the way that it has that streamlined front. But the fact that this was a steam train going at 126 miles per hour nearly 100 years ago is just remarkable. And I think that even though it made that record in 1938, it was still doing the East Coast run right up until it retired in 1963. So it had a pretty good innings before it retired to the museum.
It's just incredible design and engineering. When you think about and for me, when it comes to particularly rail engineering in this country, I'm kind of half in awe of what was achieved, but also heartbroken about the state of rail transport today. And there lies the lesson about legacy, isn't it? And you're in pole position for a number of years. You even go around the world, bring your own kind of engineering feats and railway systems, and then somehow you can't quite sustain that position. I've not committed to memory the speed of the French TGV, but that was years and years and years later. 126 miles per hour. That is phenomenal, particularly when steam powered, let alone any other form of energy. So I wanted to kind of go a few years later, then 1941, this business of, which I think is quite amusing, the language of the time, telecast. So that was the term used back then. And I like the idea of twofold. It was literally the better part of 3 to 4 years of test before they could go ahead with the first one, which suggests therefore many failures and many disappointments and many kind of and not giving up. And I think to me that's something that perhaps is also a sign of the time where we seem to quit rather quickly on the new bit of software that we want to use for the organization or on a marketing campaign and so on. So here we have people trying something very novel. I can't even be sure whether there was demand, if you think about it at the time. Who would want at the time to have commercial television? So they had to also go ahead, not knowing whether this would work long term. But can you imagine the excitement if you lived in Manhattan back in the days, 1941, and to be able to see a baseball game on TV? Up to that point, you'd have had the public broadcast of the sort. I just think that we need to kind of stop for a moment and say this was 1941, and thanks to that test, that was successful after 5 years of unsuccessful test, we're now in a position to watch Netflix or Amazon Plus.
Yeah, the thing that occurs to me when I think about this is obviously this is a massive historical event, and they had been testing it for a number of years. But you could almost get the situation where they're, right, we're going to broadcast from the top of the Empire State Building, press the button, bang. But does that presume that there are actually people in New York who have a television with which to receive the signal on?
Hmm.
That was what occurred to me. They started doing this, but how did they persuade people to buy a TV in the first place to receive the signal that was being sent? Because they've nothing to base it upon other than saying it's like the radio, but it's got pictures on it instead. So I just wonder how they convinced enough people to have this equipment to receive the transmission in the first place.
But you had that, so you had, let's talk about communications campaign because you have had those who've had a television already. Minority, I would imagine, just getting one or two channels from the public broadcasting kind of services. So they had to be informed that there was a new one coming along. Then maybe the TV had to be set up differently. Did they use flyers? Did they use newspaper columns and that kind of things? But it would have been quite a targeted campaign because, of course, you could have had a signal to your point that was working, but nobody actually sat in the living room ready to watch it at the right time. So yeah, fascinating, but also it's a very, very helpful reminder that we are where we are because of something that happened quite a long time ago, and to be able to trace it back, it gives you a sense of history, but also a sense of direction about where we're going next with streaming services and more. Talking of breakthroughs, I was actually quite shocked to be reminded that the Virgin Atlantic flyer was 1987. I don't know why. I think, to my mind, it was a little later than that, as in the 90s or 2000s. So a hot air balloon across the Atlantic, and then an accident. I mean, they had to jump off because the craft was it landing in the sea as opposed to land as such.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, crikey, 1987 was the year I started working. That was the year I left university and started working, and that's half a lifetime ago. It's ridiculous. I would have agreed with you. I would have said if I'd been asked a quiz question, when did Richard Branson and Pearl Lindstrom go across the Atlantic in a balloon? I would have probably said something like 1994, 95. So yeah, it's a bit of a shock that.
From there into space decades later. So yeah, it keep doing its thing. I mean, these little trips down memory lane that they are always very enjoyable. But I think for me, viewers and listeners, it's very grounding. I keep saying it. Knowing the origin of a number of things that we take for granted today can be very, very helpful for all of us to make good business decisions. But it's time to get back into the present with our next segment: marketing tech and apps. So, Roger, what wonders from the interweb have you discovered that can make life easier as a content creator and marketer?
Well, I was thinking about public speaking again, as I often do, Pascal, and actually re appraising something that we featured in Marketing Tech and Apps in one of our very first shows over 4 years ago. And I sort of subtitled this, It's All About AI for Professional Speakers. Interestingly enough, the apps that I'm going to talk about have been around for more than 4 years, but they are one of those that I mentioned earlier that are now guilty of using the strapline powered by AI. And I do wonder whether it really is AI or whether it was just a computer program or a piece of software that they have been using, but they now feel that in order to sell it to people, they have to pretend that it's AI as opposed to just a very clever piece of software. But obviously, professional speakers, you've got to rehearse, you've got to come up with your ideas, you've got to remove unnecessary filler words, you've got to concentrate on your delivery, the speed of your delivery could be slow and high depending upon the mood, depending upon the message. You might have a fast pace in your voice or a slow pace. You might have a loud voice. You might have a softer voice, and all of those things add up to the performance. And let's face it, a proper public speech is a performance, just like a musical performance or a play or something like that. And these AI apps, these apps have developed to effectively measure that performance. And the one I wanted to talk about mainly is called the 𝗬𝗓𝗓 app. But there are a couple of others. There's one called Rehearsal Pro, and there's another one called Public Speaking Pal, which, if you look at the website, seem to do a similar job. I haven't tested those, but rather than just saying, go and have a look at 𝗬𝗓𝗓, there's 𝗬𝗓𝗓 and there's Rehearsal Pro and there's Public Speaking Pal. But basically what you do is you turn this app on, you do your presentation, and it uses whatever AI, whatever software, whatever computer gizmo is in that box. It measures all sorts of parameters, from the way you deliver, to the speed of your voice, to the pitch, to the loudness of your voice, to the way you move around, the way you use filler words, the way you repeat stuff, and it will then give you marks and areas to improve. And do you know, Pascal, it actually does a relatively good job. I'm actually quite surprised by some of the things that it picks up. So if you're a public speaker and you want to have not a human being do an assessment of what your presentation is, but a piece of software, go and have a look at 𝗬𝗓𝗓. But interestingly enough, when I did the Google search for public speaking assessment software, it also came back with toastmasters.org. And I thought, oh, have Toastmasters done a similar thing to 𝗬𝗓𝗓 and Rehearsal Pro and Public Speaking Pal and come up with an app that also measures your public speaking performance? But of course, no, they haven't. This was Google saying, actually, another way of getting an assessment of your presentation is to join something like Toastmasters, or I guess there's also the PSA, the Professional Speakers Association, as well. Why not go along to a meeting of real people, often on a Thursday night, often in the city within which you live, other public speakers at a Toastmasters meeting, deliver your presentation to real people and get real feedback from real people? I just thought, oh, maybe that's what we should be looking for. Every time there's an AI option now, let's seek out the human option and see how they compare.
You know, excuse me, it's interesting because there's more and more conversations in amongst the businesses I help, a return to the business clubs and a return to networking, but not networking a la, pitch fest kind of things, but this idea of helping each other by being in each other's company, and people do it reasonably well via a platform like Zoom and Teams and so on. But yeah, there's an appetite now for getting back into business collectives of sorts. So that I'm not surprised at all. And yeah, I mean, I did belong to Toastmasters for about a year when I first moved to Newcastle, and it was I've got very, very fond memories of my time there. That's excellent. So my selection is actually inspired by a conversation I had. So last week, at the time of recording this episode, I had the immense pleasure of hosting an AI conference sponsored by Business Durham and Durham County Council, where they wanted local businesses to have that early conversation about the AI and the ethical use of AI in business and more. And we did a session on using AI for content creation, particularly blogging, how to get your website to come alive a bit more when time is against you. And I was very, very clear that I have some reservation about using AI to produce content from nothing, just a prompt, and then do a copy and paste jobby onto your blog section. But I think AI can be a great assistant for content curation and for you to be seen to be commenting on a particular type of content. And I mentioned that a very good content marketing kind of tactic or hook is to be seen and heard being helpful by summarizing complex reports or complex sets of data and so on, and write an article that helps people understand the what, the whys, and what to do next. So I've got two AI solutions, and these are truly AI solutions as opposed to kind of AI light. So the first one is called Chat PDF. So you can see they borrowed from the Chat GPT kind of portmanteau. So this is essentially an assistant where you can upload a large report, and through a series of questions, you can understand more about the content of the PDF, but also you can start to find ways to summarize the key elements of that report, all the way to action points or key takeaways and what to do next, the next steps and so on. So chatpdf.com could be an assistant for, let's say, lengthy, complex reports from your industry and more. Another option would be something called Pop AI, so popai.pro, and this will allow you again to upload a document, but these can be more than PDF. They can be Word documents, they can be all sort of things, and through chatting, and I think that's really, really important. This is where the skill is going to come in for you to be inquisitive and asking the assistant questions about this report of yours. You can then get to a position where those summary statements, you can then use them. You can, of course, you must edit them and put that onto your website with links to the original report. If you're still not sure about this business of chatting to an AI to get extracts from the report, you could try a much simpler interface called perplexity.ai. And it was mentioned in the news section in getting himself into a bit of bother with Forbes. But for now, I would say that what perplexity.ai can do really well is allow you to upload the PDF, let's say, and actually it will be the one to bring the questions to the fore. So that's kind of a nice way to learn and practice chatting to an AI about reports, news releases, and so on, so that you can use content curation to bring interest and traffic to your website.
Oh, this is really good stuff, Pascal. And again, I think you've been championing the way that we should be doing this. And again, use it as an assistant. Don't give it control. Don't put it in charge. Use it as an assistant so that you are the creative firepower behind it, but it helps you create stuff quicker. It helps cut out all the monotonous stuff, but always stay in control. That is the way to use AI.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Now, this is it, everyone. We've reached the final segment of our video and audio magazine, Film Marketing, just after this. So you chose Presumed Innocent from 1990, directed by Alan J. Pakula, starring Harrison Ford, Raul Julia, and 𝗓𝗏𝗄𝗏. Let's watch a trailer, and we're going to comment as to why you chose this movie.
Carolyn 𝗏𝗏𝗵𝗲 was murdered last night. Some creep got into her place somehow and strangled her.
It looks like she was raped.
Rusty, I want you to handle this case personally. You're the only one around here I can trust. Just catch me a bad guy.
You're in charge of this investigation? There are 150 lawyers down there. They couldn't find one who didn't sleep with her?
Find out which of the creeps she put away is out on parole.
She's dead, and you're still obsessing.
You were in Carolyn's apartment the night she was killed. We've got the fingerprint results. There's a call from your house to hers that night.
This is absurd.
Go ahead, play cool. I know. You killed her. You're the guy. Why didn't you tell me about you and Carolyn?
This is my life. We're not talking about some gossip. But indeed, you will go to trial.
You're still in love with her.
You think that I could do a thing like that?
This is a fashion trailer. It's got the scratching noise, almost like an old record. It takes you back to 1990. Now, I must confess, I saw this movie when it first came out. I may have rented a video VHS cassette back in the days, but I don't remember the ending. So please, Roger, if you don't mind, no spoilers. I will watch it again tonight. But why did you take us back to 1990?
Well, I have very, very, very fond memories of this film. And as you watched there with the trailer, it's an intriguing trailer, isn't it? You know that it's a murder mystery. You know that Harrison Ford is the protagonist in the film. And if you cast your mind back to 1990, this is just after Harrison Ford has had that run of Star Wars films playing Han Solo. He's also, by then, will have done a couple of, if not all of the Indiana Jones films. So everybody associates Harrison Ford as the action hero, the space adventurer, the Tomb Raider. And yet here he is playing quite a sort of stiff-shirted lawyer in America. And it was a little bit of a departure for a lot of people. But I remember going to see this at the cinema. It's one of the very first films that Tricia and I went to see together. And it is one of those murder mystery films that keeps you absolutely on the edge of your seat. And there is a remarkably good twist at the end of the film, which, as you've now told me, you've not seen it for a long time. I can't reveal that twist for you other than to say it's not what you expect, and it does come as a bit of a surprise, and it is one of those sort of, oh my goodness moments. But the background as to why I've chosen this film for us to talk about this week, Pascal, is that recently there has been a TV series made of this story, originally based upon a novel by Scott Truro. Now, the TV series has just been launched on Apple TV Plus. It stars Jake Gyllenhaal playing the same role that Harrison Ford played in the original. And given the fact that I had such fond memories of the film, and given the fact that most of the stuff that this guy gets involved with is usually pretty good, we started to watch this TV series. And after the first episode, Pascal, we decided we weren't going to watch anymore because it is absolutely awful. I didn't like Jake Gyllenhaal's performance. Maybe I was comparing it unfairly to Harrison Ford, but this guy just comes across as a horrible sleazebag. Harrison Ford tried to do that, but it was much more nuanced. Some of the cast, I don't know, there's a sort of trend in some of these American series at the moment for the characters to mumble their lines, and you can't understand a word that they're saying. So there was a number of times when I actually had to pause and rewind to catch what they were talking about. The storytelling was all over the place. Now, the original film does have lots of flashbacks, and it's not in linear time, but this was just confusing. And by the end of the first episode, we didn't really know what the hell was going on. So we got to the stage where we said, you know what, we're going to have to go and buy the original film just to prove to ourselves that our memory isn't cheating, that the original film was good. So we did that. And of course, the film is absolutely superb and it nails storytelling. It's one of those films where every single line that's spoken advances the plot. Single line that's spoken is important to the plot, so that when you get to that reveal at the end, which I can't ruin for you, some of the things that were said at the beginning will make sense. And fabulous performances by Harrison Ford and Greta 𝗓𝗏, and Raul Julia in particular is absolutely riveting as the defense lawyer in this film. So yes, I'm sorry, Jake Gyllenhaal, but your TV version of this utterly sucks. And if anybody out there is looking to see a really good courtroom drama, please go and see the original film, or please hire the original film off Amazon or something, or buy the DVD. Please don't watch the TV series because it's rubbish.
I feel really bad for Jake Gyllenhaal because, I mean, there was already some very mixed, and I'm going to be kind, mixed reaction to Roadhouse as it is. We'll come back actually because I think it's a fascinating conversation to have as part of film marketing being by the 4 7Ps, if you want to go that far. But what would you make that decision to remake Presumed Innocent as a TV series, but also on the basis that the film itself is now accessible? I mean, it's not like what you and I had to do back in the 90s, which is to walk or get a bus to the local video rental store and hope that nobody had it out, because it was a well sought out after movie. When I was working in the video store in my younger days when I was a student, this was one that was out regularly because of the performance. And my memory, again, it's funny how it didn't take me all the way to the end of the film. But my memory was something that was very moody, very dark. There was a moment where you almost felt like how Julia would take over, because his performance is just exceptional in a movie. Then you have my favorites like Brian Dennehy and others. It was like a proper ensemble cast. And from what I can gather, I've not read the book, but I'm told the book is actually very, very complex, and that the directors and writers did an amazing job to make it, stand out as a movie. And so let's talk about, therefore, this idea of the transition from the action hero of the 80s to the thinking man, hero of the 90s, because many actors did that. Mel Gibson did it with Conspiracy Theory, which I believe, if memory serves, is the same director. She had the transition from all that because the audience wanted something a little different. This is also a long-ish movie. I mean, this is 2 hours and a bit, I think, the full version as well. And again, are we saying that, filmmakers were adjusting to the audience kind of behavior and the change in preferences when it came to storytelling?
I mean, ultimately, they probably cast Harrison Ford purely as part of the marketing of the film. It was such a big name. Arguably, that was at the height of his powers, wasn't it, around that time? But it is interesting in that they cast the action hero to play what is, in fact, a pretty sedentary role. He spends a lot of the film actually sat in a courtroom, obviously, and he's not even the one who's up on his feet doing all the talking. But there are subtle things. I mean, his performance is so measured. Even there was a discussion with the production about his hairstyle. Now, his hairstyle is effectively flat, and apparently Harrison Ford asked for that because the character he plays is a lawyer. He's a respected lawyer, but he does have a few dodgy things going on in his private life and in his past. And Harrison Ford did want to come across a little bit dodgy, and he wanted to come across looking a little bit guilty. And I think that was all part of selling this. Did he do this murder, or did somebody else do this murder? And to keep you guessing, because you might actually think he may have done this, because he does look a bit dodgy, doesn't he? And that's one of the things that they just got completely wrong in this TV series, because Jake Gyllenhaal just comes across as a thoroughly dislikable individual. He is sleazy, he is horrible, he's got horrible things going on in his life, and you think, no, I don't like this guy. He's obviously the murderer. Whereas Harrison Ford's performance was just on the edge, and you really didn't know, and you had just kept guessing. And I think that's the remarkable thing, and maybe that was the thing that sold the film, was getting Harrison Ford, who was mostly seen as the action hero up until that point, to do this nuanced performance, and it really did work.
Well, it's interesting about your comment about using the name as almost the hook for the audiences. The actor that you've enjoyed for now the better part of 2 decades, this is a safe bet. This would be a good use of your time and money. Because when you look at the poster, which I have committed to memory, unlike the ending of the film, because I probably looked at the VHS cassette cover it's just his name at the very top. You've got a strapline: "Some people would kill for love," and then this very simplistic montage, really, of a close up of his face, looking obviously quite concerned and lit in a kind of noir way, and then we have a capturing of the love scene, then the title, and then a very busy kind of credits section with all the other actors and so on. So it does beg the question about how all the other actors felt about the promotion of the film, because they played an essential role. This design, you could be forgiven to think that someone did it within 2 minutes. Someone would be Canva back in the days, because there's not to be a lot of effort into the design. But is it part of the visual language of the film?
Yeah, I think it's mystery, isn't it? There's a few, the picture of the close-up picture of Harrison Ford looks like a guilty man, but then there's the intrigue in the background of, obviously, this is a film about a murder, but the focus is on the love scene, and that I think it's just creating that intrigue. Let's go in there. Harrison Ford is a known concept, but I'm intrigued to see what he's going to do in this film. And yeah, I think you're probably absolutely right. The other actors probably weren't happy with the promotion, but I think that this did suck people in. And the trailer as well, I think, is a masterclass in intrigue.
Mm. And I think what is interesting about the trailer, the film, and everything else, we must remind ourselves that this is based on a novel.
Mm.
And I think back in the days, they used to pay more of an homage or suddenly create some visual hooks that would say this is based on the novel. And I was reminded by someone that used to work in the industry many, many years ago that the marketing challenge was also that there was a lot of print advertising and usually black and white. So what he did explain to me is that when we designed posters, when we chose still photography, we had to actually choose them in for something that would be legible and clear enough on very bad black and white printing of a local newspaper. And I think that's something that we forget about the power of print media back in the days, not to mention word of mouth marketing, which have been a massive part to play in the success of this film, because this was a very successful movie. I mean, in terms of revenue generation, this has worked very well for the production company.
I think, I mean, the producer, Sidney Pollack, bought the rights to the book before it was even published. They paid $1 million back in 1987, and I guess in today's money that would be a hell of a lot more. So, you know, the strength of the source material was obviously obvious to them right from the start that this was a book that will make a great movie. But I think that, as I said, you know, the book is a lot more complicated than the film, and the film itself has flashbacks, and the time isn't linear. And I think that you know, I have read the book as well, and the book is fabulous, but it's got so much more in the book than the film had. And quite rightly, you know, to keep the runtime of the film around about the 2.5 hours mark, they had to cut out quite a lot of the subplots. They had to cut out quite a lot of the characterization. And one of the other criticisms that's been leveled at the TV series is that even though the TV series has 10 hours to play with, you'd have thought that it had been able to actually put some more of that source material back in to fill out the time. But it seems that they've actually cut even more story out of the TV series than the film did, and yet they've elongated it out over 10 hours. And that's another reason why it's fallen flat, because they've padded it with stuff that was never meant to be there, rather than actually using the time to add some of the stuff from the book back in. So another reason why you should either read the book or see the film and give the TV series a wide berth.
I mean, that's a strange decision when you think about it, and I feel terrible to attack the TV series, and because I'm sure they really put their heart and soul into creating something, but it makes me uncomfortable about their perception of the audience of Apple Plus. I mean, like, are they suggesting that people can cope with more complex storytelling, more kind of measured performances and layered kind of story hooks? I don't know, but certainly I came across, but there's been many reviews of the TV series, and we are now in the days of online reviews. And RollingStone.com, the virtual digital version of the magazine, there was an article, and it was matching your considerations and views, Roger. So I just picked one or two paragraphs. This one says, anyone with even vague memories, which is me, of the film would grow impatient, while viewers new to the material would likely wonder how so much talent resulted in such a middling show.
Gosh. That is, and you know, the TV series director is David E. Kelly, and he's done some remarkably good stuff. You know, Ally McBeal's one of the ones that he's done quite a lot of the courtroom drama things. I think he even might be responsible for The Lincoln Lawyer, which is a really good series on Netflix. But no, this is truly awful. One thing that I should also have mentioned earlier is that, and you'll notice this when you watch the film tomorrow night, is that there is an incredible musical hook in the film, which reminds me of the sort of musical hook that you will get in horror films. Actually, I should have found a clip, and we could have played it as part of the show just here. But it reminded me a bit of the sort of piano-y bit in the Friday the 13th movies. But it sort of goes something like da 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 da, and that's all it is. Da 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 da. but it plays out at different speeds and at different times over the movie. And it's one of those sort of little earworm things that gets into your head. And for a couple of days after we watched the film at the beginning of the week, I'm wandering around, I'm catching myself. Da, 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 da. And I'm saying, stop it. But it was getting in there. And again, that's another remarkably clever little device to get a motif like that hooks you in and makes you remember.
And what was interesting, so I mean, it's absolutely fine for someone to make a decision to remake something. Maybe they took the view that 34 years later they're not going to get a younger audience. Although again, we shouldn't make assumptions, and they should ask: would you happily watch, let's say, a remastered 4K version of Presumed Innocent with Harrison Ford? We're still getting, obviously, he's still working. He's a known personal brand, shall we say, across generations. So shouldn't assume that a remake is required because we can't get a young audience to watch the original movie. But if you're going to go and do a TV series, which is across 8 to 10 hours, then this is your chance, to maybe be more faithful to the book because you have more time, tell the story, but also this is your chance to do something visually that has not been done or could not be achieved back in 1990. And then that takes me into my reflection on the Netflix series Ripley. So, we all know about the talented Mr. Ripley, the movie, and so on and so forth. But with this TV series, visually, it's something that has not been done before, and the story is told, very, very differently. So for me, it's back to that. I mean, I've not watched, obviously, the TV series version of Presumed Innocent, but the challenge is, have they done anything challenging or innovative visually, let alone storytelling wise? And if they haven't, then they're stripping away all the reasons why someone would go and watch it. Back to our conversation about unique selling propositions and benefits and so on. So it's a tough one, and I do think sometimes with TV series, because they have the immediacy of the streaming services and the captive audience, I find something in marketing to be lacking. It just appears out of nowhere, on your kind of selection list, that you can go through whichever platforms. And I wonder whether, because of the absence of a fully fledged marketing campaign, they are also making some mistakes at the production phase.
Yeah.
So once again, Roger, a fine selection, and I just can't wait to watch this film. Despite talking to you and forcing myself, I have not remembered the ending whatsoever of Presumed Innocence. So expect a message from me, this time tomorrow. Everyone, thank you so much for listening and watching Two Geeks and a Marketing podcast. This is episode 120, quite a milestone for us. We've been producing this audio video magazine for 4 years now. Please continue to subscribe and leave comments if you haven't done so in the usual places. Until the next time, go out there and make sure your marketing is done right. I was Pascal Fintoni, and it was Roger Edwards.